Since the 1st century BC, the Roman Empire has been moving like a hurricane that cannot stop in front of it. One by one, he was destroying communities that tried to resist this hurricane, and by 58 BC, the hurricane had begun to move towards the northwest of Italy. Caesar's conquest of Garia was one of the most comprehensive military operations of the period, which had attracted the attention of Rome for the first time during Caesar's conquest of Gaul and Britain, which was separated from Europe by the English Channel. The island of Britain, whose iron mines had whetted Caesar's appetite with their unprocessed gold and fertile land, was dominated by Britons, mostly of bald origin, on the island. Cities were known for putting nails on their faces before wars and Tuesday paints they made from forest fruits to make them look scary and to strike fear into their enemies with their wild screams during the war. The Roman army had encountered the Celts' cousins in Gaul even before Caesar's expeditions to the island of Britain, and they had witnessed this frightening state they had taken on during the war. Caesar could not achieve lasting success against the cities in his expeditions against Britain. And content with small gains, he returned to continental Europe with his army after these first attempts to invade the island. The issue of Britain was suspended in Rome for a long time. However, this situation would change with the death of Cumabelli, the king of the Catual-Loani, a Briton tribe, in 39 BC. After Cumabelli's death, his two sons Caratacus and Tabadomus, who were anti-Roman, went south and began to plunder tribes that were allies of the Romans. One of these tribes, the leader of the Horses and Tabes, fled to Rome and asked for help from Emperor Claudius. Thus, the Romans had a legitimate reason for war to invade the island. Emperor Claudius commissioned them to invade the island of Britain by forming a quartet under the command of an eminent senator. The Roman legions that landed on the island in 43 years reached the vicinity of today's city. After a few minor skirmishes, the Roman army, which faced Cunobal's Mongols Karat Hakuz and near the Midway River, defeated them after long clashes. Tokat's Muse was captured and killed by the Romans after the battle. His brother Cratacus hid in the forests and continued to cause losses to the Roman army with his raids for 7 years. But he was defeated and captured at the Battle of Kyk Caradoc in 50. So, during these years when the Romans were turning Britain upside down, the leader of two new tribes that ruled in the east of the island allied with the Romans, and the Romans allowed him to rule his tribe independently, provided that he taxed them and supported Rome politically. He thought that with this agreement, he and his family members would be accepted into Roman citizenship in the future. But this thought of the Blutan tribal chief was no more than a dream. With the accession of Emperor Nero to the throne in the 54th year, the fate of the peoples living in Britain, especially his wife and daughters, would change forever. Nero ascended to the throne in 54, then killed his mother and half-brother, who supported him and mentored him during his first years as emperor. In this way, he had eliminated two people who might have had a say on the throne. The cruelty and insatiability of the Roman Empire were embodied in the character of Nero, and the partnership would soon fall like a dark cloud over the people of Britain. Although the Roman Empire had taken over a significant part of the island until that day, the imperial authorities did not exert great pressure on the island's people. They did not interfere with their beliefs and traditions. However, Nero ordered the pressure on Keller to be increased. In this way, he wanted to make sure that the authority of the Roman Empire would not be questioned by the cities and to consolidate Roman rule on the island. When the calendar showed 60 years, the two kings of Eni, Prasuagus, passed away. In his will, he declared that he left half of his lands to the Emperor Nero, and the other half to his wife Boudica and 2 daughters. Prasuagus thus guaranteed the future of his daughters and wanted to ensure the continuation of the alliance with the Roman Empire. After his death, the procurator of Roman Britain went to the Iceni tribe based on this will. The new queen of the tribe, Boudica, thought that the Romans had come to take the land left to the Emperor Nero. But one thing he didn't know was that men and women were equal in the British tribes. In contrast, in Rome, women did not have the right to become heirs. And according to Cato's, this land was actually Emperor Nero's right. Boudica could not submit to it. He was determined not to let his land be taken away from him no matter what. But the consequences of this determination have been too severe. She was flogged by Roman soldiers in front of her people and her daughters, and the Roman prosecutor, not content with that, had allowed the soldiers to rape the queen's daughters. Rome had shown its dark side to the Celts. The queen and princesses of the Defiant tribe were humiliated. Their lands were plundered, their property was confiscated, and their relatives were enslaved. At this time, Emperor Nero commissioned a Roman general named in order to completely subjugate the cities. He was a very popular man in Rome. As the first Roman to cross the Atlas Mountains in 42 years, he had won great successes against the tribes of North Africa. While here he had the opportunity to experience firsthand how to subjugate a people. And now he wanted to subjugate the British just as he had done to the Africans. To assimilate cities and in order to break the hopes of freedom, he first took action to destroy the pure mutts living in the Anglesey region. The priesthood were engaged in healing and witchcraft and were considered sacred by the British tribes. These tribes began to get restless when they received the news that Rome was going to attack the Holy Durites. He had a great opportunity on his hands. He could have turned this unrest to his advantage. To do this, he had only one thing to do: to unite the angry natives of Britain against the Romans. The Queen immediately took action and held a meeting to get support from anti-Roman tribes such as Tests, Watery Tests, where she gave a speech to tribal leaders and urged them to fight to live their religion freely, be governed according to their own laws and get rid of Roman domination. Boudica didn't need to make a lot of effort to impress the Bluetons. It was enough for him to hearken to the small burning fire for a while to get the necessary support. Everyone who could fight with Rome, without saying men, women, old people, children, began to join the army. The meaning of this was this: this struggle was a nation struggle. Losing the war did not just mean the destruction of the army. At the same time, the existence of the people was also endangered by the presence of Queen Boudica with her army in Rome, the most important city in Italy and the symbol of Roman domination on the island, the public smoke. So he set out to attack Colchestra, as it is called today. The queen wanted to increase her army's faith by capturing this city. It was a city built in the Roman style. However, since the Romans thought there was no need to protect this city with walls, the city was not surrounded by walls. The Roman general had taken the garrisons in this city with him when he went on an expedition to destroy it. In other words, the city was completely defenseless in the face of Boudica and his army, which was burning for revenge. The city managers were not long in sensing the impending disaster. Londinium immediately. So they asked for help, who is in London today, but prosecutor Catus underestimated the riot. And the number which he had made public had sent only 200 Roman soldiers. In addition, 2,000 Roman soldiers from the 9 legions in the vicinity were also called to help defend the city, but they were trapped by these soldiers and completely destroyed. When the defense was so inadequate, the cities managed to enter the city without encountering significant resistance. Boudica ordered his army to kill anyone who stood in their way, so he would speak to Rome in a language that Rome understands. He had no pity for Rome's children. He also had no intention of taking pity on the children of Rome, and on Boudica'S orders, the Celtan army had crucified, burned, or killed everyone in the city, including women and children, using various types of torture. When the news of the atrocity reached Paulinus, he had not yet finished his fight with the Roman general, but as a result of this new development, he found himself in a dead end. If he left the expedition unfinished and did not face Boudica'S army, he would have condoned the destruction of the Roman cities by the Celts, but if he ended the current expedition, he would have missed the opportunity to destroy it. Moreover, this situation would be perceived as Rome's weakness and increase the city's faith in victory. Paulinus, who decided to finish what he started, quickly attacked and defeated them. Then he immediately prepared a vanguard to determine the situation in the public and moved to the region with this vanguard, while his legions were following him from the rear. Meanwhile, Boudica was starting to move towards his new goal. Londinium. That is, today's London. Londinium was founded in 43 years immediately after the Roman invasion of Britain. This city, which was the commercial center of the island, was mostly inhabited by merchants, travelers, Roman officials and their families. From this point of view, the city was of great importance to Rome. Pauline's Londinium arrived just before Boudica'S army reached the city and thought about defending the city against the Celtic army. But his legions were still on the way, and it didn't take him long to realize that he couldn't defend the city without these legions, so he left it to its fate and set out with his cavalry to meet his legions in the north. Meanwhile, Boudica Londinium came and made a great destruction just like here, put the Romans in Cossacks and set the city on fire in order to avenge what was done to her and her daughters. Boudica'S army had also destroyed Londinium, one of the most important centers of Roman trade, and with each victory, the despair of people who had doubts that they could defeat Rome in the Kurd army is also being defeated. These thoughts were replaced by the belief and desire for victory. When the Britons came together, they realized that they could do great damage to the Romans, and now their courage had increased decently. So much so that many people who had never been in such a battle before, such as farmers, peasants, prisoners in the urban army, were now counting down the days to fight the Roman army as soon as possible. Boudica'S goal before facing the Roman army in the north was the given city on its way. Anticipating that the Celtic army would attack the given Yuma, he ordered the city to be evacuated as soon as possible. The general was able to save the Romans from the massacre this time, but could not prevent the burning and destruction of the city. The Celts had deconstructed 3 cities in succession, which were symbols of Rome's dominance on the island of Britain. About 70,000 civilians were killed in these cities, as well as about 1,500 legionaries were destroyed by the soldiers of the warehouse. The cost of what had been done to Boudicca and her daughters had been very heavy for Rome, Paulinus with his legions trailing behind in the northeast of his territory. It merged into the location called today's Wagning Street. So Pauline's Boudica'S army he wanted to offer rest to his legions by pulling as far west as he could. The Roman army was trained for open field battles. The cities, on the other hand, were good about sudden raids in the forests, and Paulines knew this, so he chose a suitable battlefield to meet the Celtic army. He led his army through narrow passages and placed it in a position surrounded by wooded slopes, so that when the Celtic army came to fight, it would have to pass through this narrow passage. This meant that they could get a small number of people through the gate at the same time and could not use their numerical superiority. Also, the rear of the Roman army was closed by the forest area, and it was very difficult for an attack to come from here. The army presence was about 11,000 soldiers. These soldiers were well trained, and they were experienced in war. His army consisted of an estimated 120,000 Celts, mostly rebel farmers, peasants, whose main occupations were not military service. Fighting in the area he had chosen for the battle would have been a great disadvantage for the Kurd army, but they appeared in the face of Paulinus's legions, regardless of where they would fight, both due to their numerical superiority and the drunkenness of their previous successes. They wanted to take revenge on Rome and win their freedom as soon as possible. It was impossible for the Romans not to be concerned when they saw the huge army standing in front of them. About 120,000 Celtic, with their faces painted, were passing out of themselves uttering wild screams. Even professional soldiers could be timid in the face of such a sight. In order to encourage his army, Paul turned to the dolphin soldiers and made the following speech. "Ignore the noise made by these savages. They're not soldiers, they don't even have proper equipment. We've beaten them before, and we will repeat them when they encounter our weapons and spirituality." Meanwhile, Boudica was giving commands to his army from the royal carriage where he was sitting with his 2 daughters and preparing them for battle. His soldiers also needed encouragement. Boudicca addressed them and said the following: "I am the descendant of a powerful man, but I am not fighting for my kingdom and my fortune. I, as an ordinary person, am fighting for my freedom that has been taken away, for my injured body, and for my angry daughters. Remember, too, what you are here to avenge. There is no other way but to leave this square either in victory or by dying with honor." After this speech, Boudicca ordered his army to attack and began to advance towards the Roman army, taking his place in the front line with his chariot in order to encourage his soldiers. The cities that decamped to the attack, accompanied by frightening screams from behind the queen, decamped through the narrow passages and ordered their soldiers to shoot spears. When they began to enter the range of the Roman army, many of the spears thrown by the Roman soldiers were hitting lightly armored urban soldiers advancing through the narrow valley without a gap between them. In this way, the Romans had caused great losses to the cities, and after the spear shots, he ordered his army to attack the city soldiers without disturbing their order. Unlike lightly armored cities, Roman soldiers used armor called lorica hama, which consists of ring chains attached to each other individually, or lorica segment, which consists of segmented metals. These armors were the last product of the technology of that period. In addition, the Roman army used long shields called scutums. Bomb soldiers on the front line joined these shields side by side to form a wall, while those on the back line protected against all kinds of attacks by closing the bases of frontline soldiers with their shields. All these technical details would have given the Romans a tremendous advantage when the collision began. Cities had to break through their shield wall in order to damage the Romans. But in doing so, they became the target of short Roman swords called, which were thrown through shields deck. Another advantage of Roman soldiers was their physical endurance. Tired Roman soldiers often moved to the rear by order of their commanders. The rested soldiers behind them were welcoming the tired enemy soldier to the front lines. As the war progressed, the cities that increased the intensity of the pressure caused the dissolution of some Roman lines. At the same time, however, they were exhausted, and with the cavalry on the flanks pressed by Pavlov's orders, the Celtic army began to melt away quickly in the face of the Roman soldiers. Pushing Boudicca's soldiers towards the narrow pass they came from, the Roman army caused a part of the Celto to get stuck here. They were decisively pushed by disciplined Roman soldiers and had to retreat towards the freight cars that were behind their army. But this move brought the end of the ball. When the large chariots were surrounded by Roman soldiers, there was no other place for the remaining cities to retreat. The Romans no longer had pity on the women, children, elderly, even the beasts of burden of the cities who were fighting for their lives here. They slaughtered every one of them, and Boudicca had to flee the battlefield to avoid falling into the hands of the Romans. As he told his army before the war, he would die with honor as a free Briton. After leaving the battlefield, Boudicca probably ended his life with his own hands by drinking the poison he was carrying with him. Boudicca showed Rome, which did not recognize her as a queen and humiliated her and her daughters after the death of her husband, showed what the anger of a queen and a mother could do, and took the lives of tens of thousands of Romans as a price for what was done to her daughters. While closing his eyes to life, he was regretting that despite doing all this, he had not struck the biggest blow to Rome. The Roman Empire had suppressed the rebellion. However, the queen had paid the price for the disrespect to Boudicca by razing the three major cities that Rome had founded in Britain, and Boudicca's uprising was dangerous. The uprising may be an inspiration to other tribes. And at any moment a new body could come out and rebel against Rome. Rome will always live in fear of this.